What's up guys, Asian here again with a build video for you guys, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade. So the Magicka Nightblade was once one of the best Magicka DPS, or at least among one of the best Magicka DPS to run if you wanted to play a ranged DPS. However, due to a few changes that happened in Elsweyr, they've kind of been brought down a few notches. They're still a pretty strong Magicka class for ranged classes now, with the loss of Minor Berserk, as well as a couple of other nerfs that have happened throughout multiple patch iterations, Magicka Nightblades have now sort of dropped down a little bit from their top pedestal. Now they're sitting closer to about second or third when it comes to the pecking order, when it comes to ranged Magicka DPS. Now, that being said, they are still very competitive. They have one of the highest bursts in the game, and they are one of the few classes that are able to use the set Master Architect to its full effect. So, despite the fact that it has lost some power over the past few patches, they still remain a very potent class in the right hands. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over skills, gear, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. As always, I'll be talking about a couple of different gear sets that you might want to consider running if you don't want to run the sets that I am using today. And then we will go over a 21 million dummy raid dummy parse, so you guys can get an idea of the sort of maximum DPS potential and kind of get a point of comparison between the other classes in the game. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So with this particular gear set, again, this is only one of a few different combinations that you could run. The gear that you will be running is going to vary depending on what sort of content that you are running, whether you're a progression group, a score running guild, the specific trial you're running, whether you're running dungeons. So again, I will be going over a couple of different gear sets that you might want to have on hand to swap out with these sets here. For our Monster Helm set, we are going with two-piece Zaan. So this does come from Scalecaller Peak, so you do need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to get this set. We have the heavy helm and the medium shoulders here in order to complete our 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy in terms of armor weight. For our body set, we are going with Perfected Siroria. This is still one of the strongest sets in the game right now for Magicka DPS. This does come from Cloudrest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to grab this set. Now, the perfect version only drops from Vet Cloudrest, and you can only get armor pieces from the +1 configuration and above, so +1, +2, or +3. So if you do just normal Vet Cloudrest, you will not be able to get the perfected armor, so you will only get perfected weapons. The imperfect version is going to be weaker than the perfect version here. So if you don't have access to that Cloudrest and you can't get these sets here, there are a couple of other gear substitutions that you could make that are easier to obtain. For our front bar set, we are going with Spell Strategist. So this is a PvP set that you get from rewards from the worthy. It's a very, very strong single target set. Of course, the caveat there is single target. So if you are in a situation where you need to do some more cleave damage, so for example in trash pulls, you might want to use a different set here, but it is still a very powerful set when it comes to pure single target DPS here. We have this on the jewelry pieces. And then for our weapons, you have an Inferno staff on the front bar. I have Precise with a flame damage enchant. You can go with Infused if you would like. The back bar, I have an Infused Maelstrom Inferno staff with an Absorb Magicka enchant. For jewelry, we have 3 Bloodthirsty and 3 spell damage enchants. You can go with Infused for your jewelry trait instead of Bloodthirsty if you so desire. If you do not have access to Somerset, then your only option is going to be Arcane, in which case this is probably still going to be the best set for you, Spell Strategist, because you can purchase this off of guild traders. And all the other sets that we're going to be talking about are all light armor sets, so the jewelry does come in Arcane. So for those of you guys who do not have access to Somerset, you still can get pretty good results because Arcane is still a fairly decent trait on Magicka DPS. For our gear, we are going with all Divines and all max Magicka enchants. Now in terms of gear substitutions, these are a couple of gear sets that you might want to have on hand that you might want to swap out, whether it's going to be on your body or the front bar set, and I will tell you which ones you kind of want to wear just because of the 5-piece set effects. So we'll be going in alphabetical order here. The first set is going to be Burning Spellweave. This comes from City of Ash, so this is a base game set here. So the 5-piece, when you deal damage to flame damage ability, you have a 15% chance to apply the burning stats effect to the enemy and increase your spell damage by 525 for 8 seconds. This effect can occur once every 12 seconds. So still a pretty strong set. It used to be the best set way back then in Homestead, even prior to that, but it has since been nerfed. Still a really decent set to run here, and it is a base game set, so you can farm it from City of Ash. It's a pretty easy dungeon to farm as long as you're doing City of Ash 1. And because it is a proc set, you can run this on the front bar like you have with Spell Strategist here, or you can wear it on the body. Next, we have Crafty Alfiq. So this is a light armor set found in Elsweyr, and this is, I like to call it the poor man's Necropotence. It basically just adds a ton of Max Magicka, as you can see here. Max Magicka is never a bad thing. It still scales all of your abilities to the ratio 10.5 Max Magicka equals 1 effective spell damage. So pretty nice set to have. It's an overland set, pretty easy to get. You can buy it off of guild traders. So definitely a nice set to have if you're just starting to get into endgame PvE. Moving on. Master Architect is another set that you might want to have on hand as a Magicka Nightblade. This pairs very nicely with Nightblades because of their 70 ultimate cost soul harvest. So definitely a set that you want to have on hand here. This can be obtained from Halls of Fabrication, which is a trial in Vardenfell, so you do need to have access to the Morrowind expansion in order to grab this set here. It is a Lammer set, and so it does come in Arcane. So because it is a proc set, you can run this on the front bar if you'd like. It does change up your bars a little bit compared to what I have here. Instead of having Soul Harvest on just one bar, you will have to double bar Soul Harvest, which isn't that big of a deal. It's not that big of a DPS loss, if at all. So Master Architect is definitely a nice set to have on hand. I'll be going over Monster Helms in a little bit here. The next set I want to talk about is going to be Mother's Sorrow. This is another base game set, overland set, so you can buy it off guild traders or you can farm it yourself. This basically adds a bunch of spell crit. So it has one max magicka and then the rest is all spell crit. Now, because the 5-piece is static, very similar to Crafty Alfiq here, you do want to run these two sets on the bodies. That way you have that 5-piece active at all times. Now, if you want to run a different set on the body, for example, Siroria and Mother's Sorrow, then you can run Mother's Sorrow as a front bar set instead. It's going to be a little bit of a DPS loss, but it's not that noticeable, if at all. So this could be run on the front bar as well. Crafty Alfiq, on the other hand, I'd probably say just keep it on your body set because Max Magicka, you don't want that to fluctuate too much. Spell crit is a little bit more forgiving that way. Already talked about Siroria. False God's Devotion is another set that you're going to want to keep on hand or potentially have on hand. This is a light armor set that's found from the Sunspire trial, so you will need to have access to Elsweyr in order to get this set. So this is the perfected version here, and really that's the only version of the set that I would recommend even trying to go for. The imperfect version, very similar to Imperfect Siroria, is not that great of a set compared to its perfected counterpart. So you do want to farm up for this set. This is basically the Magicka version of Vicious Ophidian, so it gives you a really nice cost reduction to your magic abilities of 8%, which allows you to have better sustain, which will increase your overall DPS, as long as you're not over-sustaining, which I might talk about in a little bit here. And that is pretty much it for all of the different sets. Now in terms of monster helms, so I am running Zaan. Zaan is a great monster helm if you just want to do single target DPS, and you can be within melee range of the boss, and the boss is not going to be moving around. If the boss is going to be moving around or you have to play at range, then you might want to run a different set. So for Monster Helm sets, there is Grothar, which is a base game set from Vaults of Madness. This is a very nice AoE set. It's one of the strongest Monster Helm sets in the game for Magicka DPS. Very nice AoE. It does require you to be within melee range though, so if the boss is moving around a lot or you can't be in melee range, Grothar is not the set you're going to want to run. Next we have Iceheart. This is more of a progression Monster Helm set, but that one piece is spell crit, so you can sometimes see people combine one piece Iceheart with one piece Zaan, basically two spell crit pieces, in order to get some additional spell crit. You'll often see that used when you have to play at range or the boss is moving around a lot. So this is again a progression set because it doesn't really do that much damage. It's more for that shield that you get when you deal critical damage, but it is a nice set to hold on to for progression purposes. Slimecraw is another set. So Nightblades did lose Minor Berserk from Relentless Focus and Merciless Resolve. So in those instances where you're not really going to be sure whether you're going to get consistent combat prayer, you might want to run Slimecraw instead, in order so that way you get that Minor Berserk at all times. So an example of this might be, for example, Asylum, where you might not be getting a lot of combat prayer. So Slimecraw is definitely a set that you want to hold on to. Has some niche uses, but it is very nice in those niches. And finally, Falcon Skoria. This is probably the weakest out of all the different Monster Helm sets, but it's also one of the most consistent. So the one piece adds max health, which doesn't really help out your DPS, but it is still a pretty nice armor bonus nonetheless, gives you a little bit more survivability. But it does have probably the weakest effect out of all of them, but it is pretty much one of your only options when it comes to wanting to play at range. Your other options are obviously Slimecraw and then two one-piece crit sets. So if you still want to have a little bit of additional tankiness here, then you can run Falcon Skoria instead. Now, when it comes to our character sheet, we are a Dark Elf. You can be Dark Elf or High Elves. The difference between the two of them is very small, but those two races are going to be your best options when it comes to Magicka DPS. Next best option is going to probably be Bretons. So Bretons don't have the same spell damage boost that either Dark Elves or High Elves get, but they do get 8% additional, 7% additional cost reduction on the magic abilities, so they have a little bit better sustain. They still get 2000 max Magicka, which is still a nice bonus. Moving on from Bretons, you can also run Khajiits. They get 825 across each of their 3 different stats, so magic, health, and stamina. They get a little bit of regen, so they get 85 magicka regen, stamina regen, and 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional crit damage done. So Khajiits are a very, very nice race to choose if you want to be a little bit of a hybrid build. If you want to do, let's say for example, stamina DPS or healing or tanking on the side, Khajiits are a pretty nice option. Dark Elves are really nice for a DPS hybrid option because they get both weapon damage and spell damage and max stamina and max magicka, but if you want to be the jack of all trades, then Khajiits are going to be the best option for you. For attributes, we have 64 points into magicka here. Don't need to put any points into health with this particular setup that I have here, but if you're going to be running regen food, so either Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Fillet, you might want to consider running a few points into health here just to kind of offset the health loss. We are running the Shadow Mundus. It's definitely the strongest Mundus in the game right now. Just the amount of crit damage you get from it is really, really strong. And then for food, we are running an interesting piece of food here. We're running Artaeum Pickled Fish Bowl. So this gives us max health and max magicka, and it also gives you a little bit of a fishing bonus here. But this is one of the strongest foods in the game. There is one stronger bi-stat food, and that is Double-Blooded Mara. However, using it will end up dropping your vampire by 1 stage if you end up drinking it. So if you are a vampire and you don't want to mess around with your vamp stages, you can use Artaeum Pickled Fish Bowl instead. So I am, as you can imagine, a vampire, and we do want to maintain stage 2 vampire or more in order to get that additional regen bonus that we get from our vampire passives. Now, when it comes to our skill bars, starting off with our front bar, I have Impale, Swallow Soul, Twisting Path, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, and Shooting Star. In our back bar, this is a flex spot. I have Inner Light here, but you can put your shield here, so you should be using the Light Armor Shield, either Harness Magicka or Dampen Magic. Then we have Blockade of Fire, Crippling Grasp, Siphoning Attacks, and Rearming Wrap. So that is our back bar. So you will notice that I am using Swallow Soul as my spam bull here, and that's just because I do like the additional heal that you get from using Swallow Soul. You can use Elemental Weapon instead from the Psijic skill line if you happen to have access to the Psijic skill line. You have access to Somerset. Psijic, the Elemental Weapon is going to be a little bit stronger spammable, but it doesn't have that same self-heal that Swallow Soul has. So I really like to have Swallow Soul just for that additional heal that you get out of it. Then I already mentioned that if you're running Master Architect on the front bar, you will need to swap out Shooting Star with Soul Harvest instead. So double bar Soul Harvest instead of having Shooting Star on the front bar here. Now moving on to our CP point distribution, CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 CP across each of our 3 different constellation types. Starting off with our green CPs, I have 100 into Arcanist and 75 into Tenacity. And I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord, but you can put the remaining points however you'd like. You can even drop Arcanist down to 75 in order to get another 25 points back, or you can bring a Tenacity up to 100 and have 25 less points to play around with. It's really up to you how you want to deal with that. For our blue CPs, this assumes that you have all the debuffs in the game, so you have Alkash, Torg's Infused Crusher, and so on. If you are missing some of these debuffs, then you will need to shift a couple of points out of these other nodes and put them into Spell Erosion here, so I will talk about kind of a little bit where you can take the points out. 72 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 13 into Spell Erosion, 9 into Sap Expert, 72 Mastered Arms, and 40 into Thaumaturge. Now, if you do need to drop a few points out of these other nodes to put them into Spell Erosion, because, for example, you are missing Torog's Infused Crusher, you just have the normal Infused Crusher. Drop Mastered Arms down to 66, you can drop Elfborn down to 66 if you'd like. Drop Thaumaturge down to 37 or 34, and you can even drop Elemental Expert down to 56 in order to get some more points into Spell Erosion that way. Then you have our red CPs, 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. This is a very generic approach. If you want to maximize your mitigation across any single piece of content, then you will need to shift your red CP points around depending on the specific content that you are intending to run. But this setup here will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content. So with all of that build information out of the way here, let's go ahead and talk about our rotation here. So we'll do our rotation first on the 6 million dummy, and then we'll go over to the big boy, the 21 million dummy, to give you an idea of what sort of DPS you can actually pull. So Nightblades definitely have one of the toughest rotations to learn, mainly because we are centering our rotation around the skill Merciless Resolve. So when we have 5 light or heavy attacks, you get a bow proc that you're going to want to shoot off pretty much right away. You don't want to sit on it, even though you do get some additional damage mitigation. You don't want to sit on it because you're not really a tank, you are a DPS, so you want to do as much DPS as you can. So you're really going to be centered around getting that bow proc off right away. So you definitely want to make sure you have siphoning attacks and Merciless Resolve up at all times for the sustain and then the bow proc. And then from there, you just keep an eye on all of your dots. So this is basically what the rotation looks like. It's going to be very, very dynamic because all you're really doing is you're keeping an eye on all of your dots, all of the buffs you have to maintain, and firing off that bow proc right away. So you can see here that I have a counter here with action duration reminder. As soon as I hit 4, what I do is I light attack once and I hit the bow proc right away. So I don't wait for, so I don't do this, which is what some people do. You light attack and do another ability. You want to do 3, 4 light attack bow proc. And as you can see, it is a very dynamic rotation because you are trying to basically keep an eye on all of your dots and just re-up them whenever you can. Now when you get into execute, what I like to do is I like to drop pretty much Crippling Grasp and Twisting Path, and I only maintain Siphoning, Merciless, Rearming Trap, and Blockade. You will still use the bow proc and execute, but instead of using Swallow Soul, you will obviously be using your execute Impale instead. Now for ultimate use, just stick with Soul Harvest. Soul Harvest is definitely going to be the best ultimate for you to use. It's very cheap, so the damage to ultimate use ratio is very, very good compared to something like Shooting Star. So definitely try to use Soul Harvest as best you can. It also gives you a nice damage boost through a unique debuff through this skill. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move the dummy over, 21 million dummy over here, so we can do our parse, so you guys can take a look at how much DPS we're able to pull. Now, you can use this parse and compare it to other Magicka DPS because we are using the raid dummy, so this does standardize a lot of the buffs that we're getting. So you can take this parse and compare it to other Magicka DPS that I have done. So you can't necessarily take this parse and compare it to somebody like Lyco or another DPS, just because obviously we are at different levels of comfortableness when it comes to our overall rotation. But you can use this to compare to something like a Magical Warden build that I do. So let's go ahead and get started here, and I will try to narrate throughout the parts so you guys get an idea of what's going on here. So I like to start off with the Shooting Star because why not? And do 4 light attack bow. You don't want to do 4 do a light attack 5. You can see here it's basically keeping an eye on all of our dots and trying to maintain them the best we can. Hitting your light weaves is very important as a Nightblade, as you can imagine, because of that bow ability. You definitely want to maintain leeching, particularly because we are using blue 5-stat food rather than regen food. So using siphoning to maintain our Magicka is very important here. You don't want it to be down for too long. you'll notice that I'm trying to make the Magic Resolve proc last as long as I can before I re-up it. But if you know you're not going to be able to finish your back bar, re-up all your back bar stuff, then you feel free to re-up it prematurely. For example, here I know I'll be back in time to re-up it. Make sure you're not casting Leeching Strikes too early. You do want it to run completely out so you get the most Magicka back. If you don't let it run completely out, you will not get the max amount of Magicka you could be getting from the ability. As you can see here, pretty dynamic rotation. There's nothing necessarily set in stone that I'm following. I am just following the dots, shooting off that bow proc as soon as I get it. Once we hit 25%, which we will be hitting pretty soon, we'll be going into our execute rotation instead. At that point we'll be dropping Crippling Grasp, we'll be dropping Path. At this point we are dropping Cripple, we are dropping Path. We are still using our bow procs. Instead of Swallow Soul, we're going to be using Impale instead. I'm missing a lot of my late leaves right now. So a couple of missed bow procs there. So that sometimes happens when you use your bow proc a little bit too early. Instead of firing off the bow, you actually will re-up the buff instead. So if you're a little bit too fast on that bow proc pull between that 4th light attack and the actual bow proc, I should say 5th light attack and that bow proc, then you might end up re-upping your buff rather than actually shooting off the bow. Just be a little bit mindful of that. You do need to wait a little bit there, like half a second or so before you shoot off that bow proc there. Was missing a few light weaves towards the end there, but nonetheless still got a pretty nice parse out of it. So we ended up pulling, metric loads in, 74.95 or around 75k or so. As you can see here, the Assassin's Will is a very, very strong ability here, hitting harder than our Impale does, which is why we still want to use our bow proc during execute phase here. It does scale really nicely. So even though the average is lower, our max, it does end up being higher in execute compared with Impale here. You can see light attacks make a very considerable portion of our DPS. It's very important to be able to hit those weaves. Then from there you see all of our kind of dots, things like that, Blockade of Fire, Crippling Grasp, Twisting Path, and so on and so forth. Now, this dummy is a little bit unrealistic when it comes to actual in-rate scenarios because we are getting 100% major force, and the fight does last 4 minutes 40 seconds here. So pretty long fight time, and obviously we're not going to be able to get 100% major force uptime in an actual raid, but this still standardizes all of our buffs, so we can take this parse and compare it to other parses done by the same person. So this is why we're using the raid dummy here. So 75k or so looks like to be about the best that a Nightblade can do, at least somebody with my particular skill set. So that is it for this build video. Hope you guys found this informative. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about the build itself, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Again, I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.